architecture by Le Corbusier, because it was considered such a contemporary building at the time, which is a great little side note. The other thing that was going on in this era, 1916, you see the advent of zoning in New York City. As buildings are getting taller, the importance of getting natural light into the streetscape. And this is actually a competition for the Chicago Tribune building, and we have a Saarinen design and a Ralph Walker design, but you start to see this kind of American Art Deco emerge as a design theme that comes out in part of embracing setbacks and designing that. And then, of course, you have these drawings from Hugh Ferris that were done at the same time that have become sort of emblematic of this era. And so, fast forwarding, this building is right by the Trade Center. During September 11th, it was heavily damaged by the fall of both the North Tower and Trade Center 7, and had been subsequently restored before we got involved. But the other thing that happened during this time is that the telephone technology shifted to fiber optic. And what that meant was that the sort of, originally the base of the building was entirely telephone equipment and switchgear and so forth. And also the mechanical systems that were necessary to keep that equipment cool, which was quite a footprint of mechanical. And then up above, you had the office space, by now Verizon in the building, right? And up above, you had the office space for the Verizon employees. With fiber optics, it took all of that telephone infrastructure that was required and shrunk it down to about a quarter of one floor of the base of the building. And that allowed the Verizon employees to move down in the building, and then Verizon to sell off the upper portion of the structure to our client, who brought us in as the design architect for the exterior. So we were responsible for ushering the project through landmarks, dealing with restoration, very sensitive contemporary additions to the building, also looking at schemes for additional floor area, adding lighting, and really bringing the building
and interior,
and the interior
lobby
as well. So here's some examples of some of the storefront work that we did. The building now has a residential presence, and traditionally it had been utility spaces, loading docks, vents, things like that. So it was really about doing these very, very sensitive contemporary insertions in the historic fabric to kind of open it up and create lobbies and also retail, as you can see in the next image here, and taking that back and forth with landmarks. And as Jordan mentioned, we were also charged with restoring the lobby, which is a phenomenal interior space that is also an interior landmark, which is quite rare in the city. It's a phenomenal space, has been through a lot. It was flooded during Hurricane Sandy. And it just didn't have a lot of its sort of prior glory when we got involved for a number of reasons. But one of the interesting design challenges here was creating a lobby that could serve both a very high-end residential building and at the same time the office tenants, the Verizon folks, and to not sort of bifurcate the lobby in a way that would detract from its historic importance. So we developed a sort of screen element here that would allow that sort of physical separation between the two different types of inhabitants, but allows you to perceive the whole space and the light and so forth going through. And that screen also plays off some of this kind of historical screens that had already existed in the lobby, and then really bringing up the lighting and bringing a new emphasis to these kind of amazing murals that exist within the lobby that showed the whole history of communication, starting with smoke signals and going up to kind of the advent of the telephone. But it was really great to bring this back. In part, in the 70s, this had been, a lot of the lighting had been decommissioned because of the energy austerity and so forth. So we reintroduced LED technology and brought this space back to life. And so in the end, it was really a great opportunity to bring this incredible historic relic, and open it up and give it a new life and energy, and just a really wonderful project to work on.
And to add it to the skyline at night, it had been in darkness its previous 100 years. So it was a lot of fun.
So the next project is the Midtown Viaduct. This is a competition that we entered, and we actually won the grand prize for this several years ago, but a really phenomenal experience for the studio. And it really starts, the history of this starts back in 1910 with the construction of Penn Station. And of course, everyone is familiar with this, and it's this amazing McKim, Mead and White design, 150-foot tall spans, and steel, glass, and limestone. Just an absolutely majestic way of entering the city, and very hard to look at these pictures now, knowing what has happened. So as you move through the history of Penn Station, when you get to the sort of 50s, the car really took off, and the expressway system was coming into place, and train travel was diminishing, and the Pennsylvania Railroad fell on some financial hardship, and then began to consider constructing One Penn Plaza, which is a 57-story tower on top, which would unfortunately would require the demolition of the station. And here you have like Jane Jacobs, and I think that's is that Philip Johnson, also protesting at the time. But the protest did not work, unfortunately, and the building was torn down. And this became a really seminal moment in sort of preservation in New York City, and gave birth to the Landmarks Preservation Commission. And now, of course, they're responsible for designating historic districts and individual landmarks, and sort of stewarding the historic protection of the city. And most of these projects that we're showing you here tonight are involved in that as well, of course. So, and then coming forward, I believe it was around 2010, the plans for the Farley Post Office came in and began work on the Moynihan Station conversion, which is now complete. When we first gave this lecture, it was still under construction. And then, of course, the High Line in Chelsea, which was just an absolutely amazing conversion of the old railway into a public park. In addition to that, Hudson Yards being constructed, building over top of the old rail yard with the kind of concrete platform. And this is a sort of amazing set of circumstances gave way to this competition, which said, we have all these things going on in the city in an area that was formerly, kind of incohesive, but now it's coming together. However, there's a moment in between, which is a really difficult transition, going from one to the other. So the Metals and Construction magazine, along with the Steel Institute of New York, put on a competition in 2019 to propose an urban pathway that would connect Moynihan Station over to the High Line and to Hudson Yards. And this is the competition that we participated in. Here's a couple of images just showing that transition. We have the sort of station on the right, and then moving along over to Hudson Yards, you have the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel. You have an open-air bus terminal, just a lot of traffic and congestion, people merging on to get off to the tunnel. And it's really sort of a no man's land if you're a pedestrian. But meanwhile, there's pre-pandemic about 100,000 people moving back and forth between the train station and Hudson Yards on a daily basis, and I think we're getting back to that kind of number at this point. But the idea was to look at a way of really sort of re-knitting the urban fabric here. And so our proposal was to begin with a pathway that started at the station, and then transitioned over top of 9th Avenue and came down to 30th Street, and then created a whole new system of platforms that also tied into Dyer Plaza, the elevated plaza up above, and kind of created a cap to the entrance in and out of the Lincoln Tunnel, and then ultimately connected over to the spur of the High Line on 10th Avenue, and then of course to Hudson Yards. And we really took this as a kind of a call to arms that the original Penn Station, and even the way that the High Line was originally constructed, these were really advanced ways of doing structures at the time. And so we wanted to really push the envelope in terms of what we could do. And we sort of thought of this as a kind of water jet cut steel plate assembly, which could form these really great sinuous experience of traversing from one side to the other and coming up and down. We worked with Silman Engineering to calculate all the loads. It was amazing. We had like all these sort of three-dimensional models to make sure that this was actually like a real proposal that could be built. And the bridge over 9th Avenue in particular, we're able to achieve enough mass and height with the steel composition to be able to achieve these incredible spans from one side over to the other. But then thinking of the experience and sort of the programming of the bridge, in that the High Line is sort of like a single pathway, and there's a couple moments where you can break off. But we had so much area here that the thought was we could create these overlapping sort of pathways, and you could have one that was a almost express lane for commuters, and you could have one which is a little bit more slow for tourists. But there could also be moments of programming, like places to gather. You could have a little bar or cafe along the path. We even thought of a kind of water feature that would be open to below with a tunnel, and you would see the lights of the cars coming through. A bit of an amphitheater. We're really trying to create a very vital, urban, almost theatrical experience with the proposal. So here's some views. On the left, we have a view over towards 10th Avenue. On the right, back towards 9th. And of course, one of the things that was central to the project was knitting in landscape and thinking that this is a new opportunity for a High Line sort of thing, where in the High Line, most of the soil depth is up to maybe 18 inches at the most. But here we have the opportunity to get much better depths and get even taller trees and plants that could be part of that whole experience. And then ultimately, creating just this wonderful place to kind of meander and hang out, even the sort of amphitheater condition, embracing the fact that cars are coming in and out, making that part of the urban theater, and ultimately going over and connecting to the High Line itself and Hudson Yards and making that a much more easy sort of pedestrian transition than it is right now. In that it's a very difficult streetscape to navigate. So we were fortunate enough to win this competition. A sort of much less ambitious version has been constructed, but we're hopeful. This along 30th Street, there's still a real opportunity here to make a great connective tissue, and would love to see that come to fruition.
All right, so 831 Broadway. This is a project that's just south of Union Square. And in a lot of ways, the building itself was kind of a microcosm of the neighborhood of the time. If you go to the next slide, the building is a building that you've all probably walked by dozens of times without ever knowing what happened inside. And what happened inside is it was a collection of I think the preeminent abstract expressionist painters. So World War II kind of chased a lot of talent out of Europe, obviously. It ended up in New York City, and they tended to aggregate in this neighborhood just south of Union Square over to Washington Square, because these were warehouses, manufacturing buildings and showrooms, department stores that fell out of favor as all of that development started to go to the Upper West Side. And so they had these like great high ceiling spaces for cheap, where the artists kind of flocked there. So remarkably, this building, if you go to the next slide, it was in the middle of the entire area where all the ABEX guys practiced, and they'd hang out every night together and kind of push each other as kind of like a singular unit of artists. It was so interesting. And so our client bought this building with the intent of demolishing it and putting up a tower. It had all been approved. Landmarks did not want to designate this on the merits of architecture, but they revisited the topic and determined that it was of great cultural import, being one of the few remaining buildings where the painters painted. And so the kind of star of the show at 831 was Willem de Kooning, and here's a picture of him in the studio. But his neighbors were Paul Jenkins, Herbert Ferber, Larry Poons, Who else was there? Did I say Paul Jenkins already? I did. Yeah. Okay. I'll say it again. Paul Jenkins, the third time. Anyway, there was and his wife, of course, Elaine de Kooning, who did a very famous portrait of JFK. Anyway, a very vibrant community in this building. They were there in the 1950s and 1960s, and then ultimately started to migrate other places. Larry Poons, I think to this day, is still there, but de Kooning himself moved out to East Hampton for kind of the final phase of his career. But here's some more amazing pictures of him in the space in the building. So when the building ended up getting designated, it put a stop to the demolition order that our client had, and the Landmarks Preservation Commission recommended that they consult a few different architects who were on that list, fortunately, and we were ultimately selected. And so for the building, it became about restoring the base building, the historic portion where de Kooning and his cohorts practiced, and then building the additional FAR that would have been a tower kind of a little bit more thoughtfully on top of the building. And so that vertical enlargement, we went to Landmarks and said it should remain visible because there's got to be a way to communicate this incredible history. We're going to restore the base building, but how do people know the magic that happened here? Because the ABEX artists, it was the first time New York in the United States were ever taken seriously as an arts hub. And you think about what New York is today, a cultural center of the world, it was not that until this. So this was an incredibly important moment in the building, or in the city's history, so the building should reflect that. So when we thought about the qualities of what the addition should be based upon, we wanted to draw aspects from the various painters. And so the bottom, I think we've got de Kooning's work, and then up above, was it Olitsky and some of the other painters that were in the building. I could say Paul Jenkins again, Paul Jenkins. And so we looked at the qualities of their paintings and tried to find commonality from an otherwise really kind of disparate series of paintings. And that was really, at the heart of it is innovation, that these guys were using paint, which had been used for hundreds of years, in a totally different manner. Abstraction, obviously, they're taking content, and till this point, like photo-illusionistic painting and figure painting was, you know, the center of the art world, and now these guys are taking figures and distorting them and taking all of this content and rejiggering and helping you look at things in an entirely different way. And then finally, like, these guys were painting emotions. It was like very gestural, very dynamic. You had Jackson Pollock doing these kind of dynamic and always unfinished pieces. And de Kooning was the same way. They said he never finished a piece until somebody forcibly removed it from his studio. Then it was done. So if you go to the next slide. So we started focusing in on parts of de Kooning's paintings, and things that looked quite random were actually like really immaculately organized. There's a series of columns. It's almost to the 1/8 of an inch. But you don't perceive any of that. You see, you see kind of disorder, but it's a very ordered disorder, and that was of great interest. This piece in particular is called Excavation, and it kind of captured his enthusiasm of walking around New York City and seeing all of this construction activity and all of the things that we can't see on the other side of walls. He tried to capture that in one painting. And so we kind of, broke all of that down, the brushwork and the gestural and emotional qualities, and then tried to, bring that into, the perilous journey of trying to take something from the art world and bring it into the architecture world. Where we landed was using reflection, or the reflective material. It's something ubiquitous, kind of analog to paint. Paint was always here, but never used this way. Glass is always here, but hasn't been quite used this way, where we thought of them as these kind of mirrors that could reflect like a curated canvas, right? Where we're reflecting buildings, the sky, the street, a landscaped area at the setback, and that all of these things will be changing, especially with all of the energy and kind of kinetic qualities of Union Square and below. We imagine, if you go to the next slide. We imagined this really intense, kind of almost like scattering of sky and building and reflection. If the next one maybe. Yeah, here that quality changes over the course of the day and eventually becomes transparent. So it's kind of a evolving, never completed building that has, while it doesn't look like abstract expressionists, the spirit is from their work. So this is just diagrams and try to figure out what we wanted to reflect and how we could get reflections from certain areas. And then then we get to give it to our staff to, hey, you can figure it out from here. So this is some of those diagrams to make it all work. And then great detailing. You can see at the heart of it is these columns, just like that de Kooning piece, that it looks quite random, but it's very highly organized, highly ordered. And then the landscaping, we had a lot of fun because we thought about the transition that happens to de Kooning in the building, where he goes from these urban landscapes like that excavation piece to moving to East Hampton. So we brought some of the flora of East Hampton here so that could reflect in the kind of composition or reflection of the facade. So yeah. So Landmarks thought it was way too extreme and asked us to kind of revisit. They love the idea of reflection. They wanted it a little bit shorter. It could be visible, but it's got to come down a floor. What that did is it brought square footage up in the form of a tower just off the site. And then we went to a design, if you go to the next one, that borrowed more from the base building. So while they love the idea of the connection to the Abex painters, they wanted it also to relate to the Griffith Thomas building down below. At some point over the process, it became an important piece of architecture. We weren't quite sure when that happened, but it happened at some point. So it became a balance of those two considerations. So it's reflective, and the ingenuity side of it is that we found a few manufacturers that could do pieces of glass that are 9 feet by 12 feet, massive, and slump them to almost look like glass had been poured on the building down below, which was, to us, very exciting. Also quite expensive. Not so exciting for our client, but Landmarks liked it. And keep going. So this is the final design. Then we got invited to the Biennale in Venice, and we exhibited kind of a great series of videos and kind of a series of renderings and thoughts about this project there. And then that started a relationship with Venice that we'll show. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just a couple more projects. Yep.
So then